A recent documentary about musician Billy Joel got me thinking about something that impacts each of us in our own life. Stay tuned. Hello, friends. Pastor Tim Westermeyer here, Senior Pastor of St. Philip the Deacon in the western suburbs of Minneapolis. Good to be with you as always. This past week, my wife and I watched a documentary that's on, I think it's on HBO, about Billy Joel called Billy Joel and So It Goes. It's a 5-hour documentary retrospective of his life, his career. Perhaps some of you have seen it. And it got me thinking about a couple of things that I'm going to talk about in both this episode and I think in the next episode, so it'll be another two-parter. One of the things that struck me in watching this, and by the way, what I'm saying here, you don't need to be a fan of Billy Joel necessarily, of his music, of his life, anything like that, but I think what I'm going to talk about is relevant regardless of your feelings about him. One of the things that struck me watching that documentary was the amount of criticism he received while he was sort of a rising pop, rock, blues star. I actually tried to find a few quotes of some of those negative reviews, which I guess he famously would read from the stage. I couldn't find them quickly, but ironically, I found a review of the documentary, which was itself very negative, which summarized a lot of those reviews by saying, during his late 1970s and early 80s commercial heyday, Joel was routinely savaged by critics, often accused of effectively being a human jukebox stocked with pale facsimiles of other, better music, which summarized pretty well, I think, the again, snarky, negative, vitriolic almost criticism that Joel got. In the documentary, I don't remember, they interviewed a whole lot of rock artists and musicians. I don't remember which of them said this, but one of them, talking about that negative criticism that Joel received, asked the question, where are those critics today? Who knows about those critics? And meanwhile, Billy Joel, again, whether you like him or not, I will just rattle off a few of accolades of his or records he's hit. He's sold over 160 million records worldwide, making him one of the world's best-selling musical artists, fourth best-selling solo artist in the United States. His greatest hits compilation album is one of the best-selling albums in the United States. He has won 6 Grammy Awards. He is one of 30 people to be inducted in the Madison Square Garden Walk of Fame. He has a star in the Hollywood Walk of Fame. First non-classical musician honored with a portrait in Steinway Hall. In 2013, he received the Kennedy Center Honors, the nation's highest honor for influencing American culture through the arts. And then he was the 6th recipient of the Gershwin Prize for Popular Song. That's just a handful of many of the accolades and awards he's received. So again, whether you like his music or not, he's accomplished something through his art, through his music, and he will leave a legacy, okay? And so I want to just reflect on that through the words of a few other authors, 2 of whom I've lifted up here, 1 of whom I'm not sure I have, to put the place of criticism or to put some perspective in criticism, because my assumption is, even if we aren't Billy Joel, and I certainly know that I'm not, when we go about our own work as a pastor, as a doctor, as a teacher, as a parent, as a community member, as a business person, my very strong hunch is all of us, get criticized for things we do by people who don't know what they're talking about. And so I want to sort of this is, I guess, an encouragement for those of you who have been criticized for your work, that maybe you're actually the one that's on the right path, and maybe you should find ways to disregard some of the criticism that comes your way. And I'm going to suggest you do that in this episode by just lifting up a couple of things. One is from C.S. Lewis. This is from this little book. I've mentioned it before. This is an essay called Fernseed and Elephants. He's talking here about how people have, there's been literary criticism of his own writing, And it is always wrong, basically, is what he says. And so I'll read, he sort of sets this up. He explains he's read some reviews and then other reviews and then started paying attention to some patterns and themes. And he says here, let's see, I must first record my impression, then distinct from it what I can say with certainty. My impression is that in the whole of my experience, not one of these guesses, this is in the criticism of his work, has on any one point been right. That the method shows a record of 100% failure. You would expect that by mere chance they would hit as often as they miss, but it is my impression that they do no such thing. I can't remember a single hit. In other words, a single accurate note from his critics in terms of their assumptions about how he wrote his work or what was important to him and so forth. But he says he's humble enough to say, but as I have not kept a careful record, my mere impression may be mistaken. What I think I can say with certainty is that they are usually wrong. Okay? So again, this is literary criticism versus, I suppose, musical criticism, but the point is the same. These critics, most of whom we don't know who they are either, we're wrong about Lewis. We still know about Lewis. We don't really know about them. Flannery O'Connor, another wonderful author, favorite author of mine. This is a collection of her letters, The Habit of Being. Wonderful collection of letters by a brilliant author of the 20th century. And here she's talking about, again, the interpretation of some students in a class led by a teacher about one of her works. This is a letter, if you want to look it up. It's dated the 28th of March, 1961. It's just entitled To a Professor of English. It begins, the interpretation of your 90 students and 3 teachers is fantastic and about as far from my intentions as it could get to be. If it were a legitimate interpretation, the story would be little more than a trick, and its interest would be simply for abnormal psychology. I am not interested in abnormal psychology. She goes on and on and on about this for 3 paragraphs, and then she ends the letter simply by saying, my tone is not meant to be obnoxious. I am in a state of shock. So again, another really famous author responding in this case not to a professional critic, but to English professors, teaching her work in a way that she says, you are getting it completely, totally wrong, okay? And I'm going to end with this. I can't remember if we talked about this book before or not. This is Brené Brown. Some of you may have heard of her. She's a past Faith and Life speaker. This is a book of hers called Daring Greatly, and the title of the book comes from a very famous speech given by Theodore Roosevelt, delivered in April of 1910, delivered at the Sorbonne in Paris, France. It's titled The Man in the Arena. Maybe you've heard it. And again, this quote that I'm going to read is what gives Brené Brown's book its title, Daring Greatly. And it reinforces better than anything else I can think of this idea that the critic very often doesn't know what he or she is talking about. And the person who's doing the work, again, the business person, the lawyer, the doctor, the teacher, the parent, is the one who's in the arena, as you'll hear me quote in a second, the one doing the work. And as Roosevelt says here, if you're the one doing that work, don't pay attention to the critics unless they're in the arena with you experiencing what you're experiencing. So I'm going to read, this is this passage that gives this, that made this speech famous. And by the way, he uses the language of he and man here. I'm not going to try to redo that to make it include both sexes, but when you hear it, I hope you'll hear men and women both. This was again from 1910. Here's what Teddy Roosevelt says. It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, E-R-R-S, who makes mistakes, who comes short again and again, because there is no effort without error and shortcoming. The credit belongs to the one who does actually strive to do the deeds, who knows great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly. Okay? So, again, I mentioned this is going to be a two-parter. I want to leave you with that quote from Roosevelt as an admonishment, as an encouragement, as a helpful reminder to keep doing your work. And don't pay attention to the people who are criticizing your work. Next episode, I'm going to flesh that out a little bit and talk a bit about, well, how exactly do we do that as Christians? And I have something I want to point you to, but I have a feeling this has already gone a little long. I hope that's okay. Don't criticize it. Although if you want to comment about it, that's okay too, as I mentioned in the last episode. So anyway, my thoughts based on this documentary about Billy Joel, as always, again, in seriousness, if you do have thoughts or comments, I'd love to hear them. I appreciate you spending a little time with me today. And until next time, be well, stay in touch, and God bless.